Welcome to you all. My name's Peter Barnes. I'm the pastor here at the Presbyterian Church here at Revesby, and I'll chair this. But a special welcome to all of you, but to particular to Abdullah Kunde. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, but I trust I'm somewhere near it. And Samuel Green, and to everybody else who's come. Just a couple of introductory things. Abdullah is a medical student at the University of New South Wales. He's undertaking Islamic studies at Sydney with Sheikh Wesam Chakawa. Close. He lives with his wife and corgi in Campbelltown. He's a huge fan of Doctor Who. You meant to put good things on your CV. And he and Samuel have debated many occasions. Samuel Green is an Anglican minister. He works with the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students, the Universities of Australia. His degrees in chemical engineering and theology. Long had an interest in Christian-Muslim dialogue as written and debated in this area before. So welcome especially to your two speakers. Just a couple of things. Can you turn your phones off if you've got mobile phones? In the debate, don't interrupt. If somebody says something you disagree with, that's all right. You'll get a chance to question and answer. Or if not, then later we can go downstairs and have a cup of coffee there and you can tackle the speaker or somebody else. But give them a free run. We've got a bell. This is the substitute bell. I'll dong this, hopefully without breaking it, a minute before the end of each time slot. So when you hear that, you've got a minute to go. I think I'll be going for my watch, not that, but it's very, very close. So my watch is probably about 30 seconds past that. Abdullah will speak first, 25 minutes. They get 25 minutes each, then Samuel. Then they get 10 minutes reply each, and then 5 minutes refutation of what's taken place. Then there's question and answers, Q&A. There's a piece of paper down the back and there's pens. If you've got a question, write it down. We won't take any questions from the floor. That's a recipe for trouble, I think. Probably all right here, but we'll still go with that. You write them down. Can I just remember this, if the speaker has 10 minutes to respond and there's a lot of questions, he might not get through your question. So feel free, I think, to come up after and tackle him, but you might not get your question answered. There's no guarantee, but they get 10 minutes each to answer questions, and there's concluding statements of 90 seconds each. Then, if you want to come down and have a cup of coffee together, and we'll speak on. But welcome to all, and a special welcome to Abdullah Kunde, and we'll hand over you. Sorry, I didn't mention the topic. The topic is the Qur'an miraculous? So that's our topic tonight. Okay.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد Assalamu alaikum jami'an rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and greetings to the Christians. Thank you very much for having me here. I think it's a rarity for a Muslim to be standing behind the pulpit of a pastor who's sitting in the same church at his own pews. So I thank you very much for the opportunity, and tonight I'll be explaining, at least in brief terms, why we believe that the Qur'an is miraculous and has a divine origin. Now, I'm going to have to shift backwards and forwards from the microphone because unfortunately I can't stretch that far. But basically I wanted to start off with what I guess a secular definition of a miracle is. And perhaps one of the more famous secular definitions comes from a now dead philosopher, David Hume, who in simple terms said that a miracle is something that defies the laws of nature. However, a miracle would have to be assessed based on its weight, on the weight of its evidence, and we can only really consider the evidence of a miracle if we're actually there, pretty much. Okay, so for example, if I were to say, well, I just walked across the ocean, okay, not on a ship, I walked on water, I would need witnesses to that claim, because you know that the general natural law is that water, is not solid, and I would fall through it, and that would be a silly claim to make. So then if I were to make that claim and I had witnesses to that claim, well then we'd want to hope that those witnesses were pretty reliable, okay, in order to assess the claim itself. If I had no witnesses, or if all the witnesses are long dead and we're relying on second, third or later hand information, then the claim of a miracle itself would have to be put in comparison to what we know about reality. We just know that people cannot stand on water, to use that example. Now, there is an out to this miracle problem, okay, and that is if the weight of evidence and witness testimony is so great that it overpowers the possibility that it could not just be a natural occurrence or something that was misunderstood. So kind of bear that in mind as we go on. So when we talk about the Qur'an, well, the Muslims will know this, but the non-Muslims may not. So we believe that the Qur'an, it's our holy text. It was revealed over approximately 23 years in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from about his 40th year to his 63rd, pretty much, and that it was revealed to him by God, okay, that the origin of the Qur'an is God Almighty. And the process of the revelation of the Qur'an was perhaps not something that Christians may have some familiarity with. You may think it's something like the revelation given to Moses, peace be upon him. But we would say that it's totally different, okay, that it was revealed in sections, not even in chronological order, over a 23-year period. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go on. So, what do we say about the Qur'an? This is word for word what we would say, that it's the eternal speech of God Almighty. Okay, that's what we say about the Qur'an. Now, we don't think that the Qur'an, what's coming out of my mouth when I read it, is a speech of God. Okay, that's my speech. That's created. Okay, but the Qur'an itself is the uncreated, eternal speech of God. Now, that might seem a little bit complex, and you know what? That's normal, okay? We're not going to be able to explain Islamic theology in 5 seconds, unfortunately, but bear that in mind, that that's what we believe about the Qur'an. And most importantly, we don't believe that the earlier Holy Scriptures have this same status. Okay, so while we believe that the Torah, for example, came from God Almighty, we don't believe that it shares the status of the Qur'an as being his eternal attribute of speech. Okay. Alright, so why is it that apparently smart people who, are big fans of Doctor Who believe that the Qur'an comes from God? Well, I'd say that I can summarise it for you in 4 points. Okay, first of all, the claims that are made by the Qur'an itself. Alright, so the Qur'an itself claims to be God's speech. Okay, secondly, it gives us multiple avenues to test that reality. We can then also look at the messages that are contained in the Qur'an. We will look at a couple, and yes, I'm being selective, but that's the opportunity that I have in a 25-minute presentation. We'll then consider even the way that the Qur'an wants us as Muslims to speak to non-Muslims about it. All right, and contrast that to, say, some very convenient samplings from the Christian scriptures. And then we'll talk about the reality of the authenticity of the Qur'an, which I'm sure is something that is going to come up tonight, the textual authenticity of it. Okay, so who wrote it? Well, basically we've got 3 options. We can say that either our idea is true, that God Almighty wrote it. The second option is that Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself wrote it. Or the third option is that it was other Arabs. I guess you wouldn't expect that. I'd say that Shakespeare was written by someone that can't speak English, so it's pretty fair to say that whoever wrote the Qur'an, if it's not from God, would have to have been an Arab. Now, they're the only 3 options that one can put forward. There are no feasible alternatives, and we'll go through why that is. And when we look at that, we need to ask ourselves, in terms of the 4 bits of information that I've put up, is the Qur'an more eloquent than average Arabic speech, or is it basically the same? Are the messages contained within it more eloquent and more profound than, say, messages contained in similar texts? Has the text itself been maintained better or the same as other comparable texts, and so on? This is what we need to look at. And most importantly, we also need to consider what would have been the motivation of the writer if the writer is not God, as we say, or the author is not God. So, first of all, we'll look at one of the claims that the Qur'an itself makes, which is that it is inimitable. It can't be copied. Its style can't be copied. And in most cases, tonight I'll just be looking at English translations for the convenience of the non-Muslims in the audience. So, it says in approximate English translation in the Qur'an, or do they say, he himself, i.e. the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has composed this? Nay, but they are not willing to believe it. But then if they deem it the work of a mere mortal, let them produce another discourse like it, if what they say is true. It's a very very simple challenge, okay? Because the Qur'an is not, written in binary, it's written in Arabic, okay? Arabic is a relatively simple language, 20,000 word vocabulary, 28 letter alphabet. The average human being can get to a pretty proficient level of understanding and composition. So if it's written by a person, then someone else should be able to do it. Okay, very, very simple. Now, the question is, has anyone been able to do it? Before we do, we'll look at a simple, for me it's a small example of the eloquence of the beauty of the Qur'an. And now this is obviously going to be hard. Those that have absolutely no understanding of Arabic will just have to take my word for it, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in here tonight that will be able to even clarify this further for me. This is half of a verse from the 21st chapter of the Qur'an. And in English it says, if but a breath of the punishment of your Lord touches them. And it's referring to, wrongdoers. And if they could just feel even a small amount of the punishment of God, then they would turn away and they'd say, no, we're going to be good. Now, look at the way that the language is used to emphasise this point, that such a small amount of punishment can have such a profound meaning. So we start off with the first word, and for those of you that can't read Arabic, it's from right to left. Wala'in, which indicates smallness, uncertainty. So, if only, if but. Masatun, alright, masatuhum indicates a slight touch. Okay, so a small touch. So if only a little bit, a small touch. Nafhatun, a small breath. Okay, so if only a small touch of a breath. And we know that, a breath is not something long and drawn out. From, so a piece of a small breath, just a little bit of it touching them, from a small type of punishment coming from their Lord that protects them and sustains them. Okay, so I'm hoping that the point here isn't lost, and I don't want to draw it out too long because I think maybe we will get lost. But the emphasis here that I want to make is that the language is absolutely eloquent in getting its point across. And it's layering it again and again to make the meaning very, very clear. And this is only one part of one line of the Qur'an. And we could analyse every line of the Qur'an to the same level of depth and get even more profound meanings. To give you an idea of how well it is written. So, the reality is, many people have recognised the beauty of its composition. Okay, we know that even the pagan Arabs in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, recognised that the composition itself was not natural. They called it magic, they called it sorcery. They recognised that it was not natural. Okay, even the earliest Muslims, some of the greatest Islamic personalities became Muslim after hearing the recitation of the Qur'an or reading it. And the best example would be Omar. May God be pleased with him, the second Khalif, the second Islamic president. Even non-Muslim Orientalists, and I'm going to emphasise that these people don't believe that the Qur'an has a divine origin, but even they can acknowledge the beauty of the eloquence of the Qur'an. And I've just quoted two of the more commonly known Orientalists there, Sir Hamilton Gibb and Arthur Arbery, who also translated the Qur'an into English. And they've basically said that the Qur'an is unmatched in any Arabic composition whatsoever. So, as I said, it's a simple challenge. It's not a complex language. 20,000 words, 28 letters. If it's composed by a human being, why is it that no one has been able to match it as yet? That's certainly something to think about. And the reality is, this is a unique miracle. Why is it a unique miracle? Because I'm not relying upon witnesses who are long dead. Okay, I have the Qur'an in my hands. Alright, and I know what the Arabic language is. And any human being on the face of the planet now can look at both and consider both and see if they could meet that challenge. I'm not relying just on hearsay from 2,000 years ago. It's something that can be tested now and into the future. All right, not convinced? No worries, that's fine. The Qur'an makes other claims to consider, and we'll just look at a couple of them quickly. The first one is that the Qur'an itself says, is it not something to think about that it was not revealed in just one go? Okay, that it was revealed over 23 years. And for those of you that don't know, the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was very tumultuous over this 23-year period. He went from being persecuted in Mecca to then being a governor in Medina. He went from having very little support to having perhaps the largest army in the Arabian Peninsula. Okay. Now, with dramatic socio-political changes like that, you would expect there to at least be contradictions. Okay, there's no contradictions. You would expect there to be sudden changes in theology or practice or what have you. And again, there are none. All right, so again, that is something very significant to think about. And it's fine to question. Okay, it's absolutely fine to question, and we want you to question. The Qur'an even wants you to question. Okay, the Qur'an doesn't want you to just believe things because we say them to be true. All right, and it's really important that we all consider the depth of the presentation of the Qur'an and don't just assume that, perhaps an English translation and a couple of commentaries from Orientalists is as deep as it goes. So in short, the Qur'an itself claims to be from God. It's given us very simple means as to which we can test this, and indeed one of them is very simple, just find a contradiction. And I would expect that Samuel tonight will perhaps try to pose at least one of those, because it's probably the simplest way that he could disprove the origin of the Qur'an, and God willing we'll talk about those. But I'll close this section just by saying that God bestows from on high the best of all teachings in the shape of a divine writ, fully consistent within itself, repeating each statement of truth in manifold forms. Bear that in mind when we're talking about contradictions. Now we'll just very quickly cover some of the messages in the Qur'an. So one of the messages in the Qur'an, for example, about alcohol is that, and I've got the verse of the Qur'an at the top, alcohol is prohibited even though there is some benefit in it. Ultimately, the negative outweighs the benefit. Now, here I've got some social and medical stats pertaining to Australia. Alcohol accounts for 13% of all deaths amongst 14 to 17-year-olds in Australia. Alcohol is second only to tobacco in preventable death and injury and hospitalisations. Alcohol is significantly associated with crime. Alcohol costs the Australian community about $15.3 billion 2004-2005 financial year. That's gone up, obviously, since then. And think about how much that money is and compare it to, say, how much a roundabout costs and, how much of a big deal it is to build a roundabout. 13% of Australian children live with guardians that abuse alcohol. This is from an Australian Institute of Family Studies paper that was just released earlier in the week. It's a government agency, for those of you that don't know. And that's study went on to demonstrate that excessive alcohol consumption plays a part in all major forms of child abuse and neglect. Okay, so I'm presenting the negative view of alcohol. Now, the reality is, there are some cardiovascular benefits, but do the benefits get anywhere near to those negatives? Absolutely not. And, even secular research agencies have recognised this. Now, the question that I would ask myself if I were a non-Muslim is, if I was a leader in the 7th century trying to discourage people from drinking alcohol, would I tell them that there's a few negatives and there are a couple of benefits, but the negatives outweigh the benefits? Or would I say to them, just don't do it? Obviously the human would just say, just don't do it. But we don't believe that the Qur'an was written by a human. We believe that it's written by God, and He's telling us the whole truth. Okay, what about breastfeeding, healthy diets, hygiene? In particular, hygiene, washing the face and hands and arms up to the elbows. Now, we know that the introduction of hygiene into the average life of the Westerner has significantly improved health outcomes in the last 150 years. We have to bear in mind that, say, a parallel passage in the New Testament, and this is me being picky, by the way, I don't mean to offend anyone, but we know that when Jesus went to eat with a Pharisee, he didn't wash his hands before eating. And, the message that Jesus was trying to get across is not related to washing hands. It's something different, which we would agree with as Muslims. But the point is, there's no clarification that, well, don't not wash your hands, but wash them if they're dirty. And instead we've got the opposite. Okay, we've got an emphasis upon hygiene bar none. Going on, as I said, does the Qur'an ask for blind faith? No, it absolutely does not. Okay, it does not want you to just jump on to things and say, yes, I believe it, I feel good, it makes me happy, I had a dream. That's not what we want you to do. Okay, I had a dream last night that, I was an apple farmer. Does that mean I should give up medicine and go and farm apples? Of course not, no. Muslims believe based upon evidence and reality, and it's that evidence and reality that takes us towards our faith. So as we said, look at the reality that you can see around you. Alcohol's a prime example. Look at the impact that has upon the world. Okay, what does the Qur'an say about it? Consider the evidence. Put it all together. Think and reflect. Okay, and we would say that the truth stands out clearly, and that you have to be basically hitting yourself on the head with a hammer to come to an alternative conclusion. A couple of other little gleamings from the Qur'an, and as I said, I'm being convenient. That's the advantage I get only speaking for 25 minutes to start with. The first thing is the Qur'an encourages us to think about where we give our money to, even to religious leaders. Now again, think about this in terms of who wrote it. Okay, if you're a religious leader in the 7th century and you're trying to build up your power base, would you tell your followers, think twice before you give me money? Because before me there have been corrupt religious leaders. Probably not. I don't know too many cults that tell people that. Think about also what it says to the people that don't feed orphans, that don't take care of the needy. Again, if you were someone that's trying to build up your own power base, would you include this information? So think about what is the motivation of this writer, okay, if they're including this stuff. So what about women? What's the deal with women's finances? Can I stop my wife from getting money? Well, my wife works more than I do, and unfortunately she gets to keep her money. And every now and then I get a gift. Got me a very nice gift for my birthday, actually. It's my birthday today, so that was nice of her. But, that's a reality. That's an Islamic reality, that men have to pay for the whole household. Women, if they work, keep their money. Again, if you're a religious leader, you're a male, you're trying to make things better for your friends, would you include that sort of information? Probably not. The reason why I keep asking that is because, remember I said we've only got 3 options. Either God is the author of the Qur'an, or Muhammad himself is the author of the Qur'an, or other Arabs in around his time are the authors of the Qur'an. And then if you're going to say it's a human, you need to look at their motivation. And I think you'd be struggling to present negative motivations when these are the messages that are being put forward. Make sure you pay people fairly. Consider unemployment benefits and debt assistance for people. These are all mandated in the Qur'an. And what about sciencey stuff? I'm sure a lot of you would be familiar with some of the science in the Qur'an documents. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I'll give you a couple that I think are important. There's a passage where Zachariah, the father of John the Baptist, is praying to God Almighty, and he says, "My bones have become weak." Now, the average person might not think that that's significant, that statement, "My bones have become weak." But for me, coming from a 7th century Arabia, that is an unbelievable statement, okay? Because the reality is, this is talking about osteoporosis. Okay, now osteoporosis, we all know about it now because the average life expectancy is 75. Okay, the average life expectancy in the time of the Qur'an was somewhere between 25 and 35 years. Okay, so understanding osteoporosis as a reality is not something that the average person would have been able to observe. And that's perhaps why it's not recorded in any Greek and even Islamic medical compilations. And again, if we contrast it to a biblical verse, we know that in Ezekiel, the idea is presented that bones are the things that last forever. Okay, when Ezekiel goes to the valley of the dry bones. Herein we have the opposite message, that bones get weak, okay, that they degrade, they get thin. That is significant. What about dark matter, the reality that 95% of the universe is dark, It's presented in the Qur'an. Now again, you need to ask yourself, if a person wrote this, what would be the point of saying that darkness is a creation? You know, can you imagine if I got my hands up like that and said, see that dark in there? I made that. That's all me. Everything else, someone else, but that dark, that's me. You'd say, how ridiculous, you know, dark is nothing. But the Qur'an says that it's actually part of reality, a creation. And again, we know that to be true. We know that the universe began from a single origin, the so-called Big Bang theory, and that's known through evidence. And we also know that the universe is expanding. Again, this is something that's only come out in the last 50, 60 years. And in fact, before that, physicists, astrophysicists in particular, used to ridicule these sorts of ideas, saying that the universe was expanding. The common theory was the steady state theory. Well, again, we've dealt with that, but also you have to think, if a human was writing this, what is the point of writing it? What message does it get across? As I said, I'm not the biggest proponent of science in the Qur'an, but I do think it is something to think about when we're putting all the pieces together. Okay, consider the Quranic method of dialogue. We're told when we're speaking to Christians and to Jews to speak to them in the nicest of ways, to not insult them. Okay, we're not allowed to insult any people. It's not an attribute of the believers. And to even not ridicule their religious beliefs. We're specifically told these things. Okay. Now, I know that, unfortunately, we don't always live up to that standard, but at least I can conveniently say this is what our text tells us to do. Okay. If I wanted to be convenient about the Christian scriptures, and the only reason why I'm doing this is because recently I've been called a liar and a deceiver and a snake by a prominent Christian apologist who I've never met in person, we could say, well, perhaps he's following what's written in the Christian scriptures. Jesus calls the Pharisees snakes, so does John the Baptist, peace be upon them, and even Paul calls the high priest a whitewashed wall, meaning he's referring to a quote that Jesus made in Matthew 23 where Jesus says that the Pharisees are like tombs that have clean walls on the outside but nothing but dead bodies and vermin on the inside, i.e. hypocrites. So, these sorts of ad hominem attacks, first of all, we would not believe that Jesus and John, peace be upon them, would have said these things. But secondly, we are prohibited from doing them by the Qur'an. We are not allowed. There is no example that we can derive in order to ridicule people. Okay? And in fact, we have pretty much the opposite instruction. If in discussion's getting nowhere, we just say, you have your religion and I have mine. And that's it, and we go in peace. Alright, what about textual authenticity? Again, I'd expect that this will probably come up at some point tonight, even though Samuel and I have discussed it at length earlier if you want to look into that. But the reality with the Qur'an is that we have thousands of pages of manuscripts spread across the majority of the world geographically, because for those of you that don't know, Muslims liberated about half of the world within 100 years of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And all of these manuscripts conform to the same skeleton text with no exception. Okay, there is absolutely no exception. The only thing close to an exception that's ever been put forward is a text called Fogg's Palimpsest. I've noticed in Samuel's notes that he's probably going to refer to that, so I'll leave speaking about that for the rebuttal. We can contrast that to the Christian scriptures, and again, this is just to be a comparable picture. I'm not trying to pick on Christians. Somewhere in the order of 200,000 pages of Greek New Testament manuscripts, no two are identical. Now, the majority of those differences are just spelling mistakes and that sort of stuff, but there are some significant differences, So we know, for example, that the story of the adulteress in the Gospel according to John, it doesn't belong there. The Gospel according to Mark, we don't know how it ends. Okay, the earliest manuscript that we have of the Gospel according to Mark is somewhere like 200 years after the text itself would have been written. We don't have this sort of manuscript history with the Qur'an. Having said that, we do have a 600-year head start, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. We should also consider, just while we've got time, the reality of early Islamic history and the impact that would have had on the manuscript tradition. Okay, Muslim history, for those of you that don't know, after the Prophet died, got a bit difficult, and we never see any editing of the Qur'an which would lead towards one of the groups that had supremacy in any part of the world at the time. Okay, so in summary, the Qur'an claims to be from God Almighty. We believe this to be true, at least in simple terms, for some of the reasons that I've just put forward. It discusses a range of issues while also setting the Islamic theology and rights and legal practices. We believe that it's absolutely inimitable, that no one would ever be able to present anything like it, and people have tried, and that the text itself is 100% reliable, and I can know that from secular historical evidence. And if you are thinking about what does the Qur'an want you to do, just acknowledge God, pray, give charity, and be kind to everyone else. That's it. That's what Muslims are commanded to do. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I haven't offended anyone.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Abdullah for coming along, and to all of our Muslim friends here tonight. Assalamu alaikum. It's a very important topic that we've got here, the question of, is the Qur'an miraculous? Why are we asking this topic? Well, we're asking it because it's a topic that Muslims are often referring to and using as a way of promoting the Qur'an and Islam. They will say that, you will see this in the books that are distributed on the Islamic tables in the universities. There will be lectures on this, and Abdullah himself has done lectures on this. There are many clips on YouTube about this topic, and there are articles about it, all saying that the Qur'an is miraculous, and that this therefore proves that it is unique and from God. And it's also related to it that it's the proof that Muhammad is a true prophet. Throughout the Qur'an, when you read it, Muhammad is challenged on many occasions to produce a miracle, and the only miracle that is really put forward is that of the Qur'an, as it says on point A on your notes there. If you are in doubt concerning that which we revealed unto our slave, Muhammad, then produce a surah of the like thereof. The hadiths, some say he did miracles, others say he didn't, but the Qur'an, I think, is quite clear that the miracle of Muhammad is primarily the Qur'an. And so the Qur'an is his great miracle. It's the evidence for him being a genuine prophet. And I guess, from, as we've just heard from Abdullah, it's the assurance that Muslims have that Islam is right. And I think from an application of this is that what it means is that because the Qur'an is miraculous, it means that they don't really need to listen to the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel that were before the Qur'an, and that they can read these and accept what agrees with the Qur'an, and they feel that this is quite acceptable because of actually what the Qur'an is. Well, is the Qur'an miraculous? You may have been brought up believing this, or you may have a Muslim friend asking you about this. Tonight I want to briefly consider the areas that Muslims are putting forward before us as they tell us that it's miraculous. So I'm going to look at, firstly, what is a miracle? And then I'm going to look at, does the Qur'an really say that it's a unique miracle? I'll look at, is it miraculous guidance? Was it miraculously given by God? Is it miraculously beautiful? Does it have no contradictions? Is it miraculously preserved? And is it a scientific miracle? And I'll look at the miraculous letters. And I may be saying some things that are hard for you to listen to as well. And again, I just ask that you be patient and let me present my case. First of all, what is a miracle? I just want to talk about a miracle in the most basic terms, and that is, it's obviously got to be something that you can see, that is recognisable. Jesus did miracles, and he had people who were hostile to him, but they still had to acknowledge that he did those miracles. At point B of your notes, we'll see that this was even the case for his disciples, where the Jewish leaders said, "What are we going to do with these men?" That is, Jesus' disciples. They asked, "Everyone living in Jerusalem knows they have done an outstanding miracle and we cannot deny it." Now that they rejected them, they rejected Jesus, but they still had to acknowledge that this miracle had happened. And so, when it comes to the Qur'an, we need to be able to see this miraculous element. My second point is, does the Qur'an really say that it is a unique miracle? And I want to say to that, no. It doesn't. Look at point C on your notes there. Say unto them, Muhammad, then bring a scripture from the presence of Allah that give clearer guidance than these two, that I may follow it, if you are truthful. Now, Surah 28 is about Muhammad and Moses and paralleling Muhammad's life to Moses' life. And the Torah is actually parallel to the Qur'an, and it's said to produce something like either of these. And so this claim of the Qur'an being unique and miraculous is actually something not just for the Qur'an, but it's also for the Torah and presumably to the other holy books. It's only mentioning the Torah in this context because it's only talking about Muhammad, but you'd have to establish the case why it wouldn't apply anywhere else. So the Qur'an's actually not saying that it is unique, and I've given you the references there. It is saying that at least the Torah, and most likely the other books, are saying that as well. Now, point 3, does the Qur'an give miraculous guidance? We see this in the publications that are presented before Christians and the non-Muslim world, and probably to Muslims as well. You can see this at point D there in your notes. Everything which a man needs, both in terms of his spiritual and social life, is contained and explained in the Qur'an. But I want to say that that's actually not the case. These claims are made about the Qur'an, that it contains everything a man needs, but you don't have to know much of Islam to know that a significant amount of Islam is based upon the Hadith. And so the Qur'an just by itself would not just have Islam. The Qur'an is Islam is not just based on the Qur'an, it's based on the Qur'an and on the Sunnah. And the books of the Hadith are very large collections. Muslims treat them very differently. Shias have different sets of Hadiths, and a large part of Islam is actually based upon this. So the Qur'an is not miraculous guidance in providing everything. It actually provides certainly significant things, but many significant essential things comes from outside of the Qur'an. And so I don't see it as miraculous guidance, since Islam is so dependent upon these other sources. Now, point 4, was the Qur'an miraculously given by God? I think one of the common points that are put forward to Christians is that Muhammad was illiterate, and that because he was an illiterate man, then something as beautiful as the Qur'an couldn't come from somebody who was illiterate. I guess my first point I would want to make about that is that to say that type of thing is actually quite racist against people who aren't literate, because many ancient cultures were not literate. Literacy has come late in human history, and pre-literate cultures had large oral traditions. Many cultures were oral traditions, and they had their oral epics. They had their classical works, which were preserved in oral form. So just because you're illiterate, it doesn't mean that you're not capable of great things. You just can't have that view of human culture. But also, I'm not convinced that Muhammad actually was illiterate. The phrase that is used, that is translated that way, is this word ummi. But I've given you a reference there. I've given you all the references to that word in the Arabic, in the Qur'an, and you'll see it at point F. But it actually doesn't mean illiterate. It actually means of the group of people who don't have a scripture. And so this is something that Muslims themselves will bring up, and you can find this. Let me read to you point E. He it is who has sent among the unlettered ones, the ummi, a messenger of their own, to recite unto them revelations, and to make them grow, and to teach them scripture and wisdom beforehand. Beforehand they were indeed in error manifest. And so you see, here's the word ummi. It doesn't mean the illiterate ones. It just means the Meccans, the people who didn't have a scripture. And I'd encourage you to look up those other references. Certainly when we read the hadiths, there are many hadiths which talk about Muhammad actually writing. So I've got one there at point F, narrated by Abbas. The Prophet said, "Come near and let me write for you a writing after which you will never go astray." And there are many of that type of hadith. Muhammad was also a trader. And if you're involved in the business of trading, there is some type of record keeping that is involved in that. So I don't believe that Muhammad was illiterate. I don't think there's actually evidence for that. And so I don't see that that represents a miraculous giving of the Qur'an. The second point I'd like to look at under the miraculous giving of the Qur'an is that the claim is that it's come straight from God to the angel Gabriel to Muhammad, and that it's this simple process, that there's no editing, it's simply given through him and then it's been dictated from him to others. But please look at point G there. Narrated by Al-Bara, there was revealed, not equal are those believers who sit at home and those who strive and fight in the cause of Allah. And that's from Surah 4 verse 95. The prophet said, "Call Zaid for me and let him bring the writing board, the inkpot and the pen." Then he said, "Write, not equal are those believers who sit." And at that time, Amir bin Maktam, the blind man, was sitting behind the prophet. He said, "O Allah's apostle, what is your order for me as regard to this verse? As I am a blind man." So the verse said that those who stay at home and don't go out and join Muhammad in the jihad, they're not equal to those Muslims, they are higher than the Muslims who stay at home. If you stay at home and don't join Muhammad, you're not as equal as those who go out. And a blind man calls out and says, "But what about me? I can't go out on the battlefield." And have a look at the next part. So instead of the above verse, the following verse was revealed. "Not equal are those believers who sit at home, except those who are disabled, and those who strive and fight in the cause of Allah." And so the verse is given once, a blind man raises a question, the verse is then given again within an extended part to take that into account. Now, if this really was the miraculous word of God, surely God would get it right the first time. And I've given you the references there. It's in Bukhari, Muslim, Mutawatir. There's actually a verse which seems to be picking up this idea at point H. And when we exchange a verse in place of another verse, and God knows very well what he is sending down, they say to Muhammad, "Thou art a mere forger." And so this verse seems to be trying to explain this situation that we've just read in the Hadith, where Muhammad says one thing, it is changed in some way, and they're saying, "Look, you're changing it, you're a forger." And the word from Allah is that, well, it's Allah who's doing this. But again, it doesn't look miraculous. It looks like somebody is editing this in response to the situations of his life. Now, I wanted to look at point 5 now, and that is that the Qur'an is miraculous and in beauty, and that there is nothing like it, and Abdullah has touched upon this. All I want to simply say here is that every culture has their classical, beautiful works. I do not doubt that the Qur'an is beautiful Arabic. I don't doubt that. The Arabs are famous for their poetry, they're famous for their oratory. I don't doubt that the Qur'an is a classical Arabic work. But the Chinese have got their classical works. The English have got their classical works. The Aboriginal cultures around the world have got their classical works. And if I said to you, produce something better than the Chinese works, who's actually in a position to do that? If I said, produce something better than William Shakespeare, who's going to do that? The people who love William Shakespeare will never believe you anyway, because they love him. And no matter how good you are, they will never believe you. So this test is highly subjective. Also, one of the things I find is that people say to me, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And I've asked them, I said, "Can you understand Arabic?" And they say, "No, I don't. I can't understand Arabic." And so what they mean by beautiful is the performance. It's the performance of the Qur'an. They're not listening to the meaning. They don't actually understand the meaning. It's the beautiful performance. And I actually think that that's something we need to be careful of, because performance can be deceptive. It's the meaning that actually matters. And if something is beautifully recited, if something is beautifully performed, like advertising on the TV or music videos, which they spend a lot of time giving a really good performance, very often to give a really unhelpful message. So the performance by itself is not a measure of whether or not something is true, just because something is beautifully performed. I'd actually like to give a part of the Bible now for us to consider at point I. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Now that is beautiful. And this is actually beautiful in any language. It can be translated into any language. I've read the Qur'an several times now. I've never actually found something as beautiful as that. I'm happy for something to be shown. I haven't found in the Qur'an anything that compares to the piercing insight of the Sermon of the Mount by Jesus, or the visions of John in the book of Revelation, or the parables of Jesus, or the wisdom of Solomon in the book of Proverbs, or just the complete stories that the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel have, or the prayers in the Psalms, or the descriptions at length of the second coming of Jesus, or the passion of the Song of Songs, or the lamentations of Jeremiah, or the reflection of Ecclesiastes, or the wisdom of God in Job. I've got a list of some of those readings there, but I'd encourage you to have a look at the beauty of the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms, and the Gospel. And the beauty with these, and the miraculous things with these, is that these can all be translated. The sixth point I wanted to look at now was that the Qur'an contains no contradictions. And this is at point J on your notes. Do they not consider the Qur'an with care? Had it been from other than God, they would have surely have found therein much discrepancy. Now, I've read the Qur'an carefully, and I guess for many Muslims would believe this who haven't read it carefully. Others would have read it carefully. But I've certainly found what I consider to be contradictions, and I'll point some of these out now. So when we have the two accounts in the Qur'an of Mary being told that she is to give birth to Jesus, in one account, two angels come to her. In the other account, it's the Spirit of God, or Gabriel as it's translated, but it's one. And they actually say slightly different things, even though it's exactly the same event. Let me read to you from a description of the creation of the heavens and the earth. In Surah 2, verse 29, it says, "It is He who created for you all that is in the earth. Then He lifted Himself to the heaven and levelled them 7 heavens." So there's the creation of the earth and then the levelling of the 7 heavens. But in Surah 79, verse 27 to 30, it says, "What, are you stronger in constitution, or the heaven He built? He lifted up its vault and levelled it, and darkened its night, and brought forth its forenoon, and the earth, and that He spread it out." And so in this account, we've got the heavens first, and then the earth second. And so it's just a different order. We've got different orders, we've got different things when it comes to punishments. These are point L, M and N. At point L, for an adulterer or a fornicator, they're to be whipped 100 times. But then later on, for women who commit indecency or adultery, they're to be detained in their houses. But then later on in the Hadith, it's stoning. And you can see different Islamic groups which apply those differently, but they're all there for the same offence. There's also what actually happens to you on Judgment Day at point O and D. At point O, we see that Allah's going to multiply for the Muslim his good deeds by 10 and just count his bad deeds as 1. But in D, it says that He's going to only receive the best of his good deeds and overlook his bad deeds. So in one account of the Judgment Day, it's multiplied by 10 and not the bad ones counted. But on the other one, it's the good will be counted and the bad ones overlooked. And so again, it's a different description. I think one of the ones that concerns Christians is what we see when it comes to how to treat Christians. At point Q, we see that initially the Muslims were to rejoice when the Greeks, the Christians, had beaten the Persians. And so there's a rejoicing at Christian military conquest. But in point R, in chapter 9, verse 29, well, these same Christians are now to be conquered and subjugated. So fight those who believe not in God in the last day, and do not forbid what God and His messenger have forbidden. Such men as practice not the religion of truth, being those who have been given the book, the Christians and Jews, until they pay the tribute out of hand and have been humbled. So early in Muhammad's life, when the Christians win, that's great, good for the Christians. But right towards the end of his life, conquer the Christians, subjugate them and reduce them in number. So it's quite a different message. To us, that is just a worrisome contradiction. The seventh point I want to look at was that the Qur'an is miraculously preserved. And this is something we're told and Abdullah has touched upon. But what I want to say is if you read the hadiths, and these are mutawatir hadiths, we see that certainly it was memorised, but it was memorised differently by Muhammad's companions. You can see at point S there that one group of Muslims were reciting the Qur'an by the male and the female, but another group were reciting it by Him who created male and female. And so that actually changes the subject of the sentence. In one, you're taking an oath by creation. In the next one, you're taking an oath by God. So it changes the subject of the sentence. And if you read it there, you'll see that the Muslim who's bringing this up is saying, I'm only going to recite what I heard from the Prophet. I'm not going to follow them. This led to Uthman, the third Islamic ruler, standardising one version of the Qur'an and burning the rest. And that's at point T. Uthman sent to every Muslim province one copy of what they had copied and ordered that all other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. And at point U, we read about one of Muhammad's famous companions, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and he said regarding this, "O you Muslim people, avoid copying the Musaf and the revelation of this man." And he's referring to Uthman's recension of the Qur'an here, Uthman's version. And so there's actually evidence, mutawatir evidence, of the companions of Muhammad not all agreeing with this standard version of the Qur'an. In fact, there are slightly different versions of the Qur'an today in what's called the different qira'ats of the Qur'an, which have the dots and dashes in different places. And again, we can have a look at some of those, but there's the one according to Imam al-Juri, al-Hafs, al-Warsh, and I've forgotten the other one now. And so there are these slight differences even today. So we don't see that it's been miraculously preserved. We see that it's been preserved in a very standardised way. I'll briefly look at this topic of the science of the Qur'an. And again, if you get the books, there's any amount of videos on YouTube about this and books about how scientific the Qur'an is. But I was actually just talking to a Muslim man who'd become a Christian, and he actually, one of the things that made him leave was the Qur'an's description of embryology. Have a look at point V on your notes. Then we created of a drop of semen a clot. Then we created of the clot a tissue. Then we created of the tissue bones. Then we garmented the bones in flesh. And he said to me that he's actually studying embryology. And he said that it was this verse for him that first began to make him doubt, because this process of the formation of the embryo, of there being bones and then the bones being clothed flesh, is actually wrong. The bones are made inside the flesh as one unit, and this order that is put out here is just incorrect. These types of things just go on and on. There's a man named Harun Yahya that you may know of, and he says from Surah 16 verse 66 to 69 about the honeybees, and he talks about how the miracle of the honeybees, because it talks about the bees doing certain things, and he says that the things that the bees have described as doing, only female bees do. And that the miraculous thing is that in the Arabic, the word for bee is in the female. And so how would it know that that's the case? But the problem with that is, in the verse just before it, it talks about the cattle from whom you get milk. And the word cattle there is in the masculine. Right, so from male cows you get milk. It actually doesn't work. I'm not saying that the Qur'an's unscientific. I'm just saying that there is a huge amount of exaggeration that goes on about how scientific the Qur'an is. Now you may say, yeah, but there are so many people, so many scientists who write about how wonderful the Qur'an is, and we've got their quotes. Well, it's very interesting that some reporters from the Wall Street Journal several years ago interviewed these scientists. And they found out that the scientists were given first-class travel and accommodation for them and their wives to an Islamic conference where they were pressed to concede that the Qur'an was miraculous. Professor Hay from the German Marine Institute said, "I fell into that trap and then I warned other people to watch out against it." So these Islamic institutions that are saying how scientific the Qur'an is, you need to understand the tactics they are using, and investigative journalists have now followed that up, and I've given you the article, you can look it up. The final one I want to look at is just how Muslims will make anything a miracle. So look at point 9 in your notes with that photocopied page. It says here, the first part of this verse of the Qur'an is Alif Lam Mim. And you'll see in the reference there, the translators have put these letters are one of the miracles of the Qur'an. So Alif Lam Mim. Now, if Alif Lam Mim, so A-L-M, if that's a miracle, if that is a miracle, then what would you call this watch? If A-L-M is a miracle. See, if A-L-M is a miracle, then anything is a miracle, isn't it? Basically what's happening is the people who are talking about this in the way of the Qur'an, they love the Qur'an. They already believe it's from God. And so they just search for anything they can to prove it. And so, as I said, they'll say things about honeybees and ALM and things which just aren't miraculous, they claim are miraculous. So to conclude, is the Qur'an miraculous? No. When it's examined, it is not miraculous in any of the way that Muslims claim. Muslims who claim this start with the assumption that the Qur'an is miraculous and then set out to prove it. But examining the evidence itself would never lead to this conclusion. This means that there is no evidence, it's not a miracle, and that there's no evidence for Muhammad being a prophet. And I'd finally just want to say, I hope that you will not think that the Qur'an being a miracle is a reason why you can turn away from reading the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel. God has given us His word, and the Qur'an is certainly not miraculous enough for us to turn away from them. Thank you very much.
A little bit of a chat on some of the points that Samuel made. The first suggestion that Samuel made is that the primary miracle of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the Qur'an, and we agree with that 100%. I'm very happy that Samuel made that statement, because we agree with that hands down 100%, and certainly I'd hope that my presentation would have been some indication at least as to why we think that. Samuel then referred to... Sorry, I'll just grab his little bit of paper. Thanks, Peter. He referred to a verse in the Qur'an from the second chapter, verse 23, where it's making a comparison between the Qur'an and the Torah of Moses. It's chapter 28, verse 49. As far as I'm aware, this is not comparing the Torah to the Qur'an. It's comparing the miracle of Moses, peace be upon him, which was magic, to the Qur'an. And in fact, the word that's used in Arabic is sahar, which is magic. I think the implication is that, if people want to call it magic, well, then do either one. Either do miracles like Moses worked, or bring something like the Qur'an. So I'm not sure that there is that comparison there between the texts, and therefore a refutation that the Qur'an is unique. And even if one could derive that meaning, one would still then need to look at all the other passages in the Qur'an that say that it is unique and different from the earlier scriptures, and it's come to correct and maintain the truth that was originally within them. Samuel then also said that the majority of Islam comes from the Hadith, and that the Qur'an is not really a basis for a Muslim. Well, I'd say that that's not exactly correct, and the reality is all obligatory actions that a Muslim must do are outlined in the Qur'an. Okay, so for example, the method of prayer is outlined in the Qur'an, the specific instructions with what we have to do. If that weren't the case, well then the Islamic schools of law would be struggling a little bit. But even if we were heavily reliant upon the ahadith, so that is the sayings, actions, and instructions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, this in of itself is an instruction from the Qur'an. The Qur'an itself says, follow the Prophet. It says that the Prophet is the best example for you. And there's many examples of verses where that's said. So, in effect, we're following the instruction of the Qur'an. And, Islamic scholars have kind of touched on this. There's a very funny story, perhaps the non-Muslims won't get it, but hopefully it'll come across, where a prominent Islamic scholar, Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he was asked by a non-Muslim, it was a challenge with the Qur'an, and the non-Muslim said, in the Qur'an it says that this is a book that refers to everything. So tell me, using the Qur'an alone, how I can make bread. Tell me how to bake bread. And so Imam Shafi'i said, okay, no worries. He said, come with me. So the men followed him, and Imam Shafi'i went to a baker, and he said, how do I make bread? And the man said to him, no, I want you to show me from the Qur'an. I don't just want to know how to make bread. He said, don't you know, in the Qur'an it says, if you don't know, ask those that do know. The Qur'an gives us very, very clear instructions. Now, Samuel then said that it seems very convenient that certain aspects of the Prophet's life, alayhi salatu wasalam, led to certain revelations, of the Qur'an itself. Well, I hate to kind of sound a bit funny, but I mean, if you're God and you've decreed everything, and you want to reveal a scripture, and you want to reveal that scripture through a specific person, wouldn't you decree that their life is going to kind of conform to an appropriate method for the revelation to be conducted? Of course. It's a little bit silly to say that it's convenient that his life then led to certain aspects of the revelation. The counter-argument to me would be, well, it was convenient that Jesus was in Jerusalem around the time of the Passover because he had to be crucified there. It's a little bit silly. Obviously, if God Almighty is decreeing certain things to happen, it in fact goes logically that the process of the revelation will be through a specific lifestyle. We wouldn't expect that the Prophet would have just been comfortable sitting behind a desk and then start writing down the Qur'an. In fact, we can now apply it to a specific life and put everything into context, which then comes into the next point when we're talking about context, which Samuel put forward a couple of apparent contradictions in the Qur'an. First of all, starting with the story of the Annunciation, when the angels came to Mary. Now, a core principle that we need to understand with regard to the Qur'an is that the Qur'an explains itself. Okay, I'll say it again, the Qur'an explains itself. So when we have this story, in one version of the story, it says specifically that the angel Gabriel was at the Annunciation. Then in the other version of the story, it says that there were two angels. This is not a contradiction. Okay, the Qur'an is explaining itself, that there were two angels there, and one of these angels was the angel Gabriel. Now, there are many other examples of how the Qur'an does this. So, for example, when the Qur'an is talking about Satan and Satan's rejection of the command from God, in the second chapter, in the 34th verse, it says that all of the angels bowed except for Satan. Okay, now that's led some people to say, well, that's a contradiction because Satan isn't an angel. But then in the 18th chapter, in the 50th verse, it says that Satan is amongst the jinn. Okay, so the Qur'an explains itself. And this is, I'm sure that you can appreciate, coming from the Christian scriptures, that it can be very convenient to take one line and say, oh, well, this contradicts another line. No, it's explaining itself. Okay, it's not a contradiction. And there are many other examples. So if we wanted to talk, say, about the story of Pharaoh, okay, in one version at the end of the story, when the Hebrews have escaped in the Exodus, it says that Pharaoh drowned. Okay, in another version of the story, it says that Pharaoh realised the mistake that he'd made and he called out to God and said, save me. And God, accepted his repentance to a certain extent, okay, and said, well, you've done wrong, you're going to have to be punished, but I will save your body as a sign for the people coming in the future. Okay, now people say this is a contradiction. In one he drowns, in another one his body gets saved. Well, no, he drowned, but his body was brought out of the water. And if we go then to the end of the verse, which says, and your body will be saved as a sign for future generations, this is exactly what the Egyptians did. They embalmed bodies. Now we can find, probably, I'm not sure specifically what Pharaoh was referring to, but we could find his body, I would suspect. So, we need to appreciate that the Qur'an explains itself. And I would hazard a guess that the Christian scriptures would have some sort of similar principle. And again, we can apply it to the fighting against Christians. So Samuel quoted in the 9th chapter, verse 29, where it says, fight against those who believe not in God in the last day, and so on. But this needs to be understood in light of other passages. So, for example, in the 2nd chapter, the 190th verse, it says, only fight against those who are committing injustice or who are fighting against you. Okay, it's very specific. So, again, we need to appreciate that the Qur'an explains itself. Now, having said that, Samuel then, when he referred to a couple of apparent Quranic variants, said that, which is only found in the hadith, by the way, not in any manuscripts, that these hadith that he quoted are mutawatir. For those of you that don't know, mutawatir means certain or absolutely known. In context, it means absolutely known. Just to correct Samuel, these hadith are not mutawatir. Just because a hadith is narrated in Bukhari and Muslim, that's not what makes something a certain hadith. Okay, to be certain, the hadith must be narrated by multiple independent chains of narration. Okay, multiple independent people. And when we talk about the collections of Bukhari and Muslim, something like 95% of the hadith within them are the same. So if we find two that are in both, and we say, oh look, this is proof that this hadith is even stronger, no, it's probably just the very same hadith but quoted in two different books. So that's a point that's probably going to be lost on most people, but I've heard Samuel say it a couple of times, and I'll just try and correct him. Now, the last thing that Samuel said was that the only way that someone could read the Qur'an and think that it's miraculous is if they're starting with a presumption. I say, well, that's totally false. The Qur'an itself says, if you don't believe that this is true, consider this, consider that. I think it's the other way around. I think in order to try and find holes in the Qur'an, you're the one that has to start with the presumption. Okay. Now, as I said, what my initial question was, if you want to say that it's written by a man, fine, but you need to tell me how, and you also need to tell me what is the motivation. What is the motivation? And I went through, as I said, some very handily picked verses, but you need to be able to justify them. Okay, if you want to say they're written by a man. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Abdullah, and it's great that we can have this discussion and do these things. I want to look at that first point, which was the one you brought up in your talk as well, about Surah 28, verse 49, not comparing the Qur'an to the Torah, but to the magic, but I'm just reading it here, and please excuse my Arabic, but it's saying, Kul fa tu bi ki tabin, and that's saying something like, say, then bring us scripture. And so the context is not magic, it's actually saying bring us scripture, which is more guiding than either of them. And the context is that the scripture he's just been talking about with Moses. So I don't accept that this is talking about magic at all. I think just reading it, I can see the word kitab. I can't say it very well, but I can see it there when I see it. You were saying that the Qur'an doesn't you're talking about the health benefits of the Qur'an in terms of being a miraculous message, and you're referring to it in terms of alcohol and what it teaches there, but there are many groups around the world which promote abstinence. So that's not just a Muslim thing, that's just not a miraculous thing. The Bible actually commands Christians that we are not to be drunk. And so it's not a teaching unique to Islam. In fact, you may be surprised at some of the other groups who have that. In fact, the reference that you gave is only part of the story, because, let me just get part 13 here. So when we look at alcohol, you quoted the verse from 2:29 where it says, they asked thee concerning wine and gambling, say, in them is great sin and some profit for men, but the sin is greater than the profit. And you said, why would somebody say this? You know, if they're trying to change things, saying, oh, well, there's some benefit there. That doesn't really lend to them to having a consistent message. But that's not all the Qur'an says. Later on in Muhammad's life, he says, you who believe strong drink and games of chance and idols and divining arrows are only an infamy of Satan's handiwork. And so there is a stronger presentation of that, which actually outlaws it altogether. And all of these actually come about through an event in his life. You're asking why he did it. Well, again, in Sahih Bukhari, we read, narrated by Jabir, some people drank alcoholic beverages on the morning of the day of the Battle of Uhud, and on that same day were killed as martyrs. That was before wine was prohibited. And so it seems that the Battle of Uhud, they lost a number of Muslim fighters because they were drunk, and so wine then gets prohibited. So there's a very practical reason for this, and that's Bukhari, Volume 6, Book 60, number 142. So there are just practical reasons for that. I don't see any of that as being particularly unique. You mentioned how washing is hygienic, but the washing in Islam is actually not about hygiene. So if you've just come out of the shower, you've washed your hair, you've brushed your teeth, you've done everything, you have to wash again before you pray, don't you? That's my understanding. I'm happy to be corrected, but if you've just got out of the shower, you actually have to perform the ceremonial hadith. So it's not about hygiene, that type of washing. In fact, you can wash yourself in the sand if there's no water around. So I don't think you can say that this is paving a way for hygiene in the world. Certainly there were other things that did that. You mentioned that money, that Muhammad talks about being careful of religious leaders. Now, I can't remember the verses for this, but I know there are certain verses in the Qur'an which make it very clear that a certain amount has to go to Allah and his apostle of all the booty that they took from the conquests. and there was a certain tax that had to be levied for all the booty they were taking. And so Muhammad actually did take a certain amount from everyone. So he may be asking them to be careful, but he himself was very strict in that you had to give him the correct amount. You mentioned that the Qur'an talks about having equal balances and that this is good. I agree it's good. But there are many religions around the world that actually teach that. It's just called justice. It's not something unique to the Qur'an. Again, I don't see this as making the Qur'an miraculous. In the book of Proverbs, it talks about that the Lord loves just scales. And so again, this is an idea actually common in world literature, in world thinking. It just actually proves that what you're showing me from the Qur'an is normal and human. You mentioned about the bones being weak and that people wouldn't know this because people only lived an average of 25 to 35 years. Well, Muhammad lived to 62 years or something, didn't he? And I think the way it works in medical terms is that if you're going to live, you live a long time. So yes, the average age might be 25 because 1 in 4 babies are dying in childbirth, but those who survive childbirth, who survive childhood, they go on to live for long ages. And I think weak bones actually could just be observed, that people just break their bones as they get older. You mentioned that Ezekiel, you're contrasting it and saying Ezekiel wasn't, this part of the Bible wasn't as good at this point and was wrong because it talks about the bones remaining. But bones do remain. It's a vision of the resurrection of Israel being dead after and being left for dead in the desert. And for those of us who live in Australia, and I'm sure in any people with a desert, you see dead cows and what's left? It's the bones. And the vision from Ezekiel is that those bones are going to come to life in the resurrection, and I won't sing the song. You mentioned about creating darkness, and you know this is scientific proof because the Qur'an talks about creating darkness and nobody would have known that darkness actually exists in dark matter. Again, this is reading far too much into the Qur'an. Isaiah 40 actually talks about the Lord creating light and darkness, so it's there in the earlier prophets. But do you actually know that people at that time thought that darkness was nothing? How do you know that? How do you know they thought it was nothing? From what I know of the ancient cultures, they saw darkness as the scary place, as the place of the jinn, as the place of the unknown. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't that darkness is nothing, that darkness was something. So that's just my understanding. I'm not an expert in it, but I think just to say darkness is nothing, Allah created the darkness and this shows dark matter, I think that is just pushing things way too far. You mentioned the expanding universe. Again, Genesis actually talks about the separating. This is just Genesis chapter 1 for Christian readers. The Lord separated things. And so we see that just as the way the Qur'an has many ideas from, which we would see as coming from Genesis chapter 1 and the creation account there, that this is just another one. We don't see it as proving something scientifically. It was there already. You mentioned about talking to people nicely and conducting good conversation with people. And that is something I'm all for, so I fully support that. And then you quoted some verses about it. But really, the Qur'an has a spectrum of verses about how to talk to people. So there are some verses which will say Christians are the nearest to you, conduct dialogue with them in the best way, reasoning. That is true, there are those verses. There are other ones, I think it's in Surah 5, and I'm sure one of you would be able to tell me, where it says that if they don't listen to you, it's no longer talking, it's actually to curse each other, to bring your families, their families, and to give a curse and see which one is lying. I've forgotten the name of that, I'm not that familiar with it, but I know it's there. So it moves from nice dialogue to cursing, and then as I pointed out in Surah 9 verse 29, if Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God, it results in conquest, in military conquest and subjugation. So you just can't pick one verse of the Qur'an when there's a whole spectrum as it revolves and evolves around Muhammad's life. You've got to look at all of those to see what it's actually saying. Now, you mentioned that all of the Qur'ans conform to the same skeletal text, and you can go around the world and do this. Well, he mentioned the fog palimpsest, and these are manuscripts where the original text has been washed off and the new text has been written over it, and scholars have now got these because people following Uthman didn't burn all their Qur'ans. They washed them and then they wrote on top. And scholars have now got them, and you can actually faintly see the old script underneath it, particularly when you put ultraviolet light. And there are all manner of textual differences with different words, different orders, a whole range of differences. There are certainly more differences, I would say, than with the New Testament, but that's for a very simple reason. We didn't burn them all to standardise one text. Ours just went out. It just went out. There was no one group controlling it. And so, yes, we have more differences for a good reason. We didn't burn them to standardise one text. I'm not convinced that that's something that we need to be saying that makes the Qur'an better, because they were burned to be standardised. So again, I just want to say I don't find the evidence for the Qur'an convincing, and but I'm really glad that we can be looking at this question. And again, I ask you to consider this just from an objective point of view. Thank you.
Bismillah. Just to correct a little bit of medical terminology and sort of nomenclature and stuff. Bones certainly don't remain. That's why we can recycle graves. So I think the longest on record that bones hang around without being treated is probably 100 years or something like that. If we go and dig up 100-year-old graves in Rookwood, we're not going to find anything there. And this is certainly something that was known to ancient people, even in the ancient Near East. So that's certainly not correct. Anyway, that's a side point. As for medical life expectancy, again, it's not just sort of what age people die added together and then we work out an average. It's worked out based upon risk factors. Okay, it's not just an average mean. So that's why, for example, the Indigenous people in this country can have a life expectancy somewhere in the order of 10 years less than the non-Indigenous population, because it's a culmination of risk factors. It's not just lowest death age added with the highest and working out an average, or something simplistic like that. Samuel went on to say that I was probably reading a little bit too much into the Qur'an to say that darkness being a creation is something remarkable, and he said that as far as he knows, people thought that darkness was something. Well, I'd ask who, because generally when you ask someone, clear your mind, imagine nothing, what do they imagine? Black or something. They certainly don't imagine a colour other than black. So that would be my assumption based on, I guess a modern sample. But if there's some evidence for ancient Near Eastern samples, I'd be more than happy to consider it. As for the claim that we burnt all our variant manuscripts and Christians didn't, this is just absolutely false. It's absolutely false. Certainly we did burn or destroy variant manuscripts, but we need to bear in mind that burning the Qur'an, and it's funny, that there was a Burn the Qur'an Day, burning the Qur'an is actually an acceptable means of disposing of it. We've only got three options: either we bury it, or we burn it, or we put it in a flowing river. So that's why they were burnt. But we know that when I think it was when Clement the first or second was a bishop of Rome, and the supremacy of the Roman bishop was starting to emerge in Christian history, he actually sent out an edict that certain books that were still on the periphery of the canon, the Christian New Testament, be burnt. And that's why, we found books that were only referred to by very early Christian scholars recently, buried in Egypt. We found them buried in other parts of the world. Why? Because the Bishop of Rome commanded that they be burnt. This is a solid gold historical fact. Now, to say that, we didn't only have one group in charge, Muslims didn't only have one group in charge. Within 40 years of the death of the Prophet, there were prominent Shia groups that were trying to take over, and indeed a Shia empire ruled about half of the Muslim world for about 500 years. And even amongst the Sunni groups, I'll just say the Muslim groups, there was a lot of arguments and infighting. We didn't have one group in charge. So that's absolutely false. Whereas the supremacy of Rome is absolutely known, and that's why basically every church at one point or another broke away from the Roman Church. Let's consider it to be the prime branch. And the Roman Church went hard out after the Gnostics, they went hard out after the Arians and others. And that's why we know of about 10 times the amount of books that currently are in the Christian scriptures that were used by some groups as scriptures that were burnt or destroyed at some period in history. So I think that the argument is the wrong way around there and can certainly be applied in the opposite direction. I guess other than that, I'd just say that it's important that we recognise that the Qur'an itself is totally different to the New Testament, the Christian scriptures. And if we're going to get picky about one word that may or may not be different, and hopefully in the question and answers we can talk about what I mean when I say we believe the Qur'an to be the word of God, then we're going to get very, very picky when it comes to the Christian scriptures. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Abdullah. I'll just look at a couple of things here. He said that the hadith I gave of the at point S, that it's not mutawatir, but it actually has two different chains of narration in Bukhari and in Muslim, and so it's what's called agreed, and it's got two different chains of narration. So I can't see why it's not mutawatir. I've actually provided that evidence because of that exact reason. Regarding this verse, again in the hadith that I gave there, where Muhammad says the verse one way, and then the blind man says, yes, but what about me? And he says it another way. Now, I understand that the Qur'an revolves and evolves around Muhammad's life, and I can see that for a particular verse. He's in a situation, he's given a verse, I can understand that. But what I'm saying is this is the same verse being edited, and surely God would get it the right way. And as I pointed out, it was an issue which even the Meccans noticed. They realised that Muhammad was saying one thing, then changing it, and this actually warranted an explanation in the Qur'an. And I'm just saying, if it's God's eternal word, it would come, and I'm assuming that the miraculous nature would be that it would come and be given. It wouldn't just be being edited further. It would be right the first time. You also mentioned that the Qur'an commands fighting against injustice, and some Muslims will say self-defence, but you said particularly injustice. Well, again, this depends upon what injustice is. And so, as I showed in Surah 9, verse 29, point R on your notes there, that if you read the verse after that in verse 30, to believe that Jesus is the Son of God counts as injustice. And so that's what they mean by injustice. So again, you've got to understand what he means by when he says injustice. It means Surah 29 verse 9 is really the verse that launches the Islamic Empire, that spreads from right across into Spain, right across into India, North Africa. This was not self-defence. Right? This is not self-defence conquering that far. These were offensive conquest establishing an empire. This is the Islamic Empire. And so it's not just a matter of fighting injustice. Well, you may think it's injustice in the way that any empire might think we are bringing justice to this world, but you're just thinking like any empire at that point. All the empires of the world, the Americans will think we're bringing justice. The French will think we're bringing justice. Everyone will think that. But, it is this idea that if you... it is certainly this military conquest idea. Now, again, you raised the issue as to who actually thought that darkness was like that. I actually didn't say that I did know. I was just asking for you to tell me if you knew. That's all. Because you were saying people, what is it? Just think about it. It's nothing. But I said, from what I know, people back then were fearful of the dark, as some people may be today. You also mentioned about the burning of the Qur'an and the burning of the Bible. But there's a big difference here. You talked about the supremacy of Rome. I want to say, you need to know your church history. Rome's not supreme. Rome does not rule over huge sections of the church. To think that Rome is supreme is the type of thing for the Da Vinci Code, in that they love that conspiracy that the Roman Catholic Church is in a conspiracy everywhere. But all the Eastern churches right across to India, they were under the Persian Empire. They had nothing to do with Rome. They came to all the councils in Byzantium and those places, but they weren't even under the Byzantine king. That these were people from different empires. Christianity from very early on was in different empires, and there was no one government or anyone in control of it. Now, certainly, they did burn some books. Some of these would be Gnostic books and books which just weren't authentic and so weren't to be used, and I agree with that. But what they didn't do was standardise the text. So they said, we've got to pick these certain books, and we're actually the ones that we're using because they were commanded to use them from the beginning. But I guess the point I want to make here is that we both have canonical questions. So I don't deny that. We both have canonical questions. The Qur'an from Ibn Mas'ud had 112 surahs. From Abu Kab, it was 114 surahs. So we both have had these questions. And I guess that's what I'm just trying to say, that neither of us should exaggerate. We've both got variants within our text. We've both had questions as to which parts are going to form our canons. It's something we both have. And so we can't go exaggerating it and saying this one is perfect and this one's not. Thank you very much.
All right. Bismillah. I'll start with the first question that I got, which has happy birthday on the other side, which is... Thank you. If the Qur'an is miraculous, are there any alternative evidences, prophecies, pre-Qur'an that would suggest this, or does the evidence come from the Qur'an or after the Qur'an? This is a very good question. I guess I would say, as the Qur'an does indicate, that there are some indications within the earlier scriptures as they exist today, which we would say is not in their original form, but as they exist today, that indicate that there will be, I guess, a final revelation. There are certain characteristics of this revelation that are referred to, in particular in the Old Testament. I studied biblical studies, and I can read Hebrew pretty well, so I'd be able to quote some of them better than the New Testament, which I have very little idea about. But for example, it's saying in the Old Testament in numerous places that the Lord will purify the speech of the people, that He will be sending a prophet who will be like Moses, and so on and so forth. These things are really for other topics that have been discussed, and I think in fact this topic was discussed last night with Samuel and another good brother of mine who's in the audience. So I direct you to have a look at them, but otherwise we can probably discuss it later on. Okay, you mentioned that no one can write Arabic in the same standards as the Qur'an, and you can witness that in 100 years you probably won't find someone to write an English passage with the same standard as Shakespeare. No, what I said with Shakespeare was that I would not expect to find someone who can't speak English who would be able to write something like Shakespeare. The point of that was that... the point that I was getting at was that we wouldn't say that someone who can't speak Arabic wrote the Qur'an. Obviously, if you're going to say that it wasn't God, that it was a person, whoever it was can obviously speak Arabic. Otherwise, they just happen to do pretty well with the whole monkey and the typewriter thing. You said the Qur'an interprets itself, but I've often heard Muslims appeal to historical texts to explain the context of verses such as chapter 9, verse 29. Can you please explain? Well, the fundamental interpreter of the Qur'an is the Qur'an. Then the next level down would be what Samuel referred to as the mutawatir ahadith. Now, again, I'll repeat it one more time. Mutawatir means that it has, some Muslim scholars say, 40 independent chains or more. Okay. Now, two chains in Bukhari, one of which is repeated in Muslim. That's what agreed upon means. It means that it's just copied verbatim. That's 2 chains. That's nowhere near 40. That would not be considered mutawatir. That would be considered khabar ahad, or singularly narrated, singular news. So we'd start with the Qur'an itself, then certain ahadith mutawatir, then mashhur, well-known ahadith, then these lower grades of ahadith, which, the majority of Bukhari and Muslim are those, khabar ahad, and so on down. And then the final things that we may look at are, for example, what we call the Israeliyat, or basically, the Christian and Jewish scriptures. But we would not use them to interpret laws. Okay, we'd only use these lower grade things to, get a greater awareness of stories. Okay, so for example, if there's, the story pertaining to the golden calf is pretty detailed in the Qur'an, but the details about the Exodus are not so detailed. So we would say that we could look to the details of the Exodus, as they're written in the Pentateuch, and we would be happy to say that that is a story, but we wouldn't consider it to be the Qur'an. And if there's a contradiction, obviously the Qur'an is supreme. As I said, the Qur'an explains itself. The beginning of the Qur'an was very shortly after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Qur'an remained unchanged since. Is this not a miracle? I think that was probably for Samuel. I don't think that's for me. If I wrote a rap song that no one could match, would you believe that it was from God? Very good question. If that rap song was of an eloquence level in its language that was new, it was a new type of eloquence, but it was a recognisable type of eloquence, that it presented theology, social, etc. messages, well then maybe I would at least consider it. But otherwise, no, what some guy does with his friends in their car and the beating of the song doesn't mean too much. If there are no contradictions in the Qur'an, why are there abrogations? Why, for example, can all monotheists be saved in 262 but only Muslims in 385? That's a very good question. And as I said, the Qur'an explains itself. So we would say that all monotheists, which are referred to in 262, are either the people that came before the Qur'an, the people that were around during the Qur'an's revelation who were the true monotheists, or then by the time 385 is revealed, as far as we're concerned, all the true monotheists are Muslims if they've received the message of the Qur'an. Okay, so that it's not a contradiction. Okay, again, you have to appreciate that the Qur'an explains it itself. If the Qur'an is so respectful for all and sundry, why are Jews called apes and monkeys? Well, Jews aren't called apes and monkeys. There's a story that says that a specific group of men were punished and turned into apes and monkeys, and this is for transgressing the laws that were given to Moses, peace be upon him, and you would find similar curses, albeit not quite that detailed, in the Christian scriptures. I mean, when Paul says that people are going to go to hell, for not accepting Jesus, like that's a pretty damning statement. I'd sooner be a monkey but not be in hell than be in hell but be a human being. I know that it is a side point, but you said that bones only last 100 years. How do you respond about finding dinosaurs? Very good question. Well, this is about fossils. Fossils are different to bones. I do have a science degree and I can explain that to you, but it's probably not relevant to right now. But basically, fossils aren't bones, they're rocks. Please explain the difference between a miracle and magic in your view. Very good question. Well, magic is not true. It's just something that we perhaps can't explain immediately, but if we think about it with evidence, then we will have an explanation. A miracle is something that even when we think about it with evidence, there is no natural explanation. Okay, so for example, if I take my watch and now it's gone, we can come up with a pretty good explanation as to how that happens. But if I manifest a watch out of nothing, that's a little bit different. So, yeah, that would be the difference between those. Okay, now I've got the theses. Not quite as long as Martin Luther's. If the Qur'an, I assume Q is Qur'an, if the Qur'an is eternal, with God being also eternal, doesn't that represent shirk? Well, no, because as I said, we believe the Qur'an is the eternal speech of God, so it's one of his attributes. Now, as I said, what I say, when I read the Qur'an, that's created. The pages, the ink, etc., that's created. But the eternal speech of God is his attribute. It's uncreated. But we don't believe, and this is a distinction between Christian theology and Islamic theology, we don't believe that the eternal indwells in the created. Okay, they're distinct. They're separate. All right. If the Qur'an is perfect, how do you explain the many grammatical mistakes in it? Well, there are none. I mean, Arabic grammar didn't exist before the Qur'an, so to say that the Qur'an makes grammatical mistakes is like saying, how come people didn't stop at the red lights before electricity was invented? I mean, it's an anachronism, I'm afraid. How do you explain the broken letters in the beginning of some chapters? I'd say refer to Islamic scholars. I'm not an expert on those. Yes, I have heard some treaties say that they are miracles, that they're unique to the Qur'an. Well, obviously they're unique to the Qur'an. They're not found in any other scriptures. So that's something at least to think about. As to what they mean, well, that's been debated by Muslims for a long time. I'm only halfway through this, but I'll just go to the next one. How can we match any verse of the Qur'an if no criteria has been mentioned by Allah? What is it that there are to match? Well, the criteria is mentioned, and I only quoted a couple of the verses. Obviously, the eloquence is one, the content of the message, i.e. theology, social, etc., and that it has no contradictions. In terms of what tools you use to get that, you can use whatever, because there's a verse that says if all of humanity and all of the jinn came together to try and do it, they wouldn't be able to do it. So the implication from that verse is get whatever tools you need, get the supercomputer, whatever you want, and have a go. And in terms of what needs to be done, well, it needs to be a new type of Arabic poetry, like the Qur'an is, but it needs to, still conform to certain rules. It needs to be grammatically appropriate, it needs to be linguistically appropriate, and it needs to convey a certain message, and that's it. And the reality is, people will know if there's something that matches the Qur'an. I even went to the extent that I quoted secular non-Muslim scholars, and I apologise that I've only got halfway through that, of Arabic and of the Qur'an, one who is a very well-known Christian, who appreciate that in Arabic literature nothing has matched the Qur'an. So to present any alternative argument like there's grammatical errors or, I don't know, spelling mistakes or whatever, is a little bit silly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions. I'll start off with one which I think you've unfortunately given me an incorrect reference, and that's okay. You've got here, does the Bible say the earth is flat? And I guess this is wanting to push back on my claims of the Qur'an and science, and you've given me Isaiah 40 verse 20. I've read that. It doesn't actually talk about that. It says, a man too poor to present such an offering selects wood that would not rot. And so, but I take your point, and I respect the question. I guess what I just want to quickly say with that is that...
22.
Is it 22? Yeah. He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, you've got the circle of the earth there. Like, what's that referring to? Is that, people may want to say it's a hemisphere, or is it flat? I don't know. It's talking about a circle at some point. But I actually don't think that the Bible, and Abdullah, I guess, would agree with me to some degree here, I don't think that the Bible's not actually trying to teach science in that way. Right? There is a scientific moment in the Bible when, in 1 Kings chapter 4, Solomon teaches zoology and botany to the nations around him. But those works of Solomon are not included. So it just doesn't actually teach that scientific way like that. Instead, the Bible, and I would argue the Qur'an as well, and this is why I don't want people exaggerating about it, uses what's called phenomenal language. That is, it just talks about what you can see, and it makes perfect sense to what you can see. For instance, the Sydney Morning Herald says that the sunrise will be at 7:30 in the morning. Now, that's actually wrong, isn't it? The sun doesn't rise. But are we saying the Sydney Morning Herald is teaching a flat earth and the sun... You know what I mean? Like, we use phenomenal language. And that's how I understand the Qur'an. That's how I understand the Bible. My problem is when Muslims just take any point and just exaggerate it to beyond what it should be saying. That's what I'm saying there. Sam, do you think that the Torah, prophets and Psalms are as important as reading the Gospel, as reading the Qur'an? Well, I actually think they're more important, but certainly from the Christian point of view, and this is a big difference, Christians, we both say we believe the prophets, but how we believe them is very different. For the Christian, when we say we believe the prophet, what we mean is that we read them. So Christians read the Torah, Christians read all the books of the prophets, we read the Psalms, we read the Gospel. We believe all the prophets, we make no distinction between them, and so we read them all. So if you came into this church this Sunday, and you're more than welcome, you might hear a Psalm being read, or you might hear some of the Torah being read. And so for me, one of the reasons I don't accept the Qur'an is that when I see people accept the Qur'an, they stop reading all the earlier prophets. But when I became a Christian, I didn't become a Christian until I was 19, I became a Christian and I started to read all the prophets. And when I was discipled at the church, they said, you've got to read the Law of Moses, you've got to read the Psalms, you've got to read all of them. And to me, that's just a great testimony to the fact that all those... it actually leads me into the next question. Is the Bible, especially the Gospel, miraculous? We don't go around saying the Bible's, the Gospel's miraculous. We don't have those types of verses. Instead, what we have is lots of quotes in the books of the Gospel from the earlier prophets showing how Jesus fulfills them. And so for us, that is the miracle, that the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel all come to their fulfilment in the person of Jesus. And as I said, the result of this is that Christians read all these books. We read the Law of Moses. We read them all, as I said. And so we're always reading them, we're studying them. In fact, without them, we can't actually understand Jesus. What Christians believe about God, that he made us in his image, that God is Father, that there is the Son of God, that there's a sacrifice for sin, that God dwells with his people. All of these things are all the way through the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel. And it's when we see that fulfilment in Jesus that we see that it's miraculous in the sense of this is truly God fulfilling his plans and purposes for the world. The burning of the Qur'an was very shortly after the death of Muhammad, and the Qur'an has remained unchanged since. Is that not a miracle that a book can remain unchanged for 1400 years, whereas the Bible has been changed even in recent history? Well, I'd argue that it hasn't been changed in recent history. The way that the way that we ascertain our scriptures, the Christian scriptures, is by going and getting all the ancient manuscripts we can find, which, as Abdullah pointed out, with the Qur'an spread over a wide area. What that means is that any change that was made in a manuscript only had the potential of affecting that area. It didn't affect copies of the Bible being made in other places, thousands of kilometres away. Now, the Qur'an, certainly the consonantal text from Uthman has been basically preserved, but as I pointed out, there are 10 accepted ways to put the dots and dashes over those, and that actually changes things. So I think it's Surah 21 verse 4 in the Hafs transmission will say Kala Rabbi Ya'lamu, which is he said, my Lord knows, but in the Warsh version of the Qur'an used in North Africa it says Kul Rabbi Ya'lamu. And so one's saying, it's a command from God, say, my Lord knows. The other one's saying, he said, that is, Muhammad said, my Lord knows. So it actually changes the subject of the sentence. So they're not all actually the same. And there are actually no two pages the same. If you get one of the books which has the 10 readers within them, on every page there are about 7 or 8 variants of some description. So there are no pages which are identical amongst those. But I don't want to exaggerate it either. I don't want to exaggerate the Christian point. I want us to be fair on this and say we've both got these textual variants, we've both got canonical questions that we've had to answer, and I think that we've actually answered them pretty well. And so I actually think we can look at our books, compare them, and have this type of discussion. And that what I don't like is just when the Torah, the prophets and the Psalms are just written off, when the things that can be said about them can be said about the Qur'an as well. Is it not correct that at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the 4 gospel books were chosen and all the others were burned? Well, actually, no. There was no actual council that decided the books of the Christian Bible. It was something that was just done informally within discussions within the churches. So you can look at all the councils that happened. The forming of the Christian Bible happened over a long period of time, and it happened over a long period of time because it wasn't a pressing issue. Right? There was no crisis, let's have a council. It was Christians were using these books, and this just continued, and it got formalised over a long period of time. But it wasn't a crisis, and so there was no council on it. The Council of Nicaea was its relation to the Christian to the Bible is that was when the Roman emperors stopped trying to burn the Bibles and destroy them, and instead now began to finance them. And so there is that shift there. But that council was primarily about the nature and person of Jesus, not about the Bible. For Sam, the Qur'an is the only book that said that Pharaoh's body will be saved for the next generation. And I assume you're referring to the entombment of his body in the mummies and all that type of stuff. And that's most likely the case. I can't remember the Bible saying that that's what happened to Pharaoh. But it certainly does talk about Joseph being in Egypt. And when he was in Egypt and died, it said that he was embalmed in the manner of the manner of the Egyptians. And so I assume that embalming bodies in Egypt was actually quite well known throughout that area. I don't think it was something that, nobody knew about, and so we've discovered the Pharaoh's bodies. From what I can gather, the Egyptians were famous for embalming bodies. They used to embalm cats. They used to embalm all manner of things. It was part of their religion. And so I think just the embalming was an understood part of their religion. And so the Qur'an mentioning it is reflecting this wider knowledge. I don't think it's anything miraculous. Thank you very much.
Thank you all again for coming tonight. I'll just wrap up on a couple of things very quickly. I was right about what I said about the verse, and I can show Sam in the Qur'an later, and he can practice his very well improving Arabic reading skills, which is fantastic. I just want to say that it's very important that we understand the nature of the Qur'an as Muslims put it forward. Okay, when we say that it is the eternal word of God, we're not talking about the words that are written down on paper. Okay, if we could put it simplistically, we're talking about the meaning. Okay, the meaning. And when we talk about the manuscript evidence of the Qur'an versus the New Testament, no one can argue that even the meaning of the Qur'an has been lost. Okay, the meaning's been absolutely maintained, and we even, as Samuel said, get down to the consonantal standard, and that's the same. We're talking about short vowels which don't exist in Semitic languages, which are different. Stuff which would differentiate whether I call my wife duha or duhe. It's not changing the word, it's just changing the way that I say it. It certainly doesn't change the meaning. I invite you all to read the Qur'an, and you can certainly read it in an English translation. I can recommend a couple for you, to consider what it says, very, very strongly. If you would like to have a chat to a Muslim afterwards, I'm sure there'll be at least a couple hanging around, or you can be forwarded contacts from us, and we'll be more than happy to get in contact with you. But please do understand that sometimes things can get lost in translation. There is a fundamental difference between what we think about Scripture and what Christians think. That's the end. Thank you very much.
90 seconds.
Yep. Well, again, I want to thank you for tonight. Thank you for your patience with me as we wrestle with each other on these very important questions. And I've given you my notes, so please go away and follow those up. Just to summarise what I was saying, I've said that the Qur'an is put forward as the great miracle of Muhammad. I still want to maintain that it does not say that it's a unique miracle, but it is the case with the Torah as well, in Surah 28 verse 49. But you're obviously going to have to go away and check that out with the commentators and read it in context to see whether or not that is the case. But from my reading, the Qur'an is saying that all of God's books are miraculous. I've shown that it's not really a miraculous message, in that a lot of the Qur'an, a lot of Islam comes from the hadiths. I know that from the amount of the hadiths that are quoted to me, and that the hadiths provide the context for reading the Qur'an. Without the hadiths and Muhammad's life, you won't be able to understand the context of the Qur'an. I showed that it wasn't miraculously given, in that it was given, that Muhammad wasn't illiterate, and that it was given and then revised over time, and I've given you the references for that. I acknowledge that it is beautiful in the way that it's recited, but I gave you beautiful parts of the Torah, the prophets, the Psalms and the Gospel, and said that beauty is in a whole range of writings, and I encourage you to read widely, and you'll find many things that are beautiful. I've put forward a number of contradictions for you to consider, and I've raised the issue of the different versions of the Qur'an and how they were standardised. I've shown that the miracles, the scientific miracles, are an exaggeration, and that the miracle letters just show that people love the Qur'an and make anything a miracle for it. And so I want to say that I don't believe the Qur'an is miraculous. But thank you very much for your time tonight. Amen.